If you want to understand why aviation accidents happen, you can't start with villains. You start with tiny moments, small choices, things that feel reasonable in the moment, so reasonable you could almost argue they were just normal.
And then later you realize those choices lined up like dominoes. Every year, 228 people die in aviation accidents. Not from storms, not from engine failures out of nowhere, not from pure bad luck. From one thing, a decision. A single human choice, made in a moment that felt completely reasonable, that triggers a chain reaction no pilot can undo once it's started.
Today, you'll walk through two crashes that look nothing alike on the surface. One involved a high-performance business jet and a retired airline captain with 17,000 hours of experience. The other involved a small single-engine prop plane flown by someone still learning how to fly.
Different aircraft, different skill levels, different circumstances. Same mistake underneath. Not lack of talent, a lack of discipline in the small moments, when discipline is what would have broken the chain.
Let's start with the jet. A Cessna Citation. 3 people on board. In the left seat, a retired airline captain. 17,000 hours. That's not a flex, it's a lifetime of pattern recognition. He'd seen failures, scares, weird instrument behavior, and, this is fine, moments that absolutely were not fine.
Most pilots will never sit through enough unusual situations to build that instinct. In the right seat, his son. Only 170 hours, a private pilot certificate, but in small, single-engine piston airplanes. He had never flown a jet. He had no multi-engine rating. And in the kind of emergency that happens in jet cockpits, he simply could not have saved the day, even if things went perfectly, because he hadn't been trained for that exact environment. The father knew this. He put his son in the co-pilot seat anyway.
Because he wanted to share the experience with his child. Because every parent has that pull. Come with me. Let me show you something. Let's do this together.
Here's the hard part. The sky doesn't care about sentiment. Before they even left the ground, the signs were there. Engine number 1 didn't start on the first attempt. A thrust reverser indicator light wasn't working. During the takeoff roll, a passenger noticed one engine appeared to be producing more power than the other.
In airline operations, you're taught that below 80 knots, below a certain point, if anything feels unusual, you reject the takeoff. Not because you're dramatic, but because you don't need the universe's permission to stop. You stop early, while you still can. Anything. A light that doesn't look right. A sound that doesn't feel right. A feeling you can't explain yet. They were not operating like an airline. So they continued. Airborne now, and the trap is tightening. They departed under visual flight rules, not because it was automatically wrong, but because it meant they didn't have instrument clearance set up before takeoff. The weather report of the time showed a ceiling of about 5,000 feet, which sounds manageable, until it isn't. As they climbed, the ceiling dropped to around 1,200 feet, broken clouds, hilly terrain below, and inside the cockpit, the son, still learning the cockpit language of this kind of flying, tried multiple times to reach air traffic control on a busy frequency, failing to get through.
They were cruising around 500 feet above the ground. In a jet. That's not cutting it close. That's surviving while hoping the next thing doesn't go wrong. Then the captain's instruments failed, critical ones. The airspeed indicator went dark. Other instruments went unreliable or disappeared too.
This is where the chain reaction gets ugly, because the cockpit is designed to be managed using information. If the information goes missing, your job becomes not just flying, you're suddenly troubleshooting reality.
So what do you do when you're the captain and your gauges go dark? You hand the controls to whoever still has working information. In this case, the only person with reliable gauges was the son. 170 hours. Never trained for that moment. Never flown a jet. Never rehearsed the particular kind of decision-making that happens when the cockpit stops talking to you clearly. The father transferred the controls. They spotted the ground. They decided to return to the departure airport. Then the captain took the controls back.
On final approach, the aircraft slowed, rapidly, dangerously, around 99 knots, then about 93. In a citation, 93 knots is stall territory. You're not a little slow. You're running out of energy. The aircraft is about to stop flying in the way it's supposed to. The passenger in the back couldn't see the gauges, so there was no immediate "look what's happening" feedback. The son, coming from small piston airplanes, where those speeds feel different and the airplane behaves differently, didn't say what needed to be said.
And the captain, the man with 17,000 hours, may not have had reliable airspeed information at that point. The airplane ran out of energy and hit the ground short of the runway. All three died. Now let's shift to the second crash. This one will feel worse than you expect, because it doesn't start with an engine or weather or some sudden mechanical catastrophe. It starts with someone who truly wanted to fly. A young woman built a following online documenting her student pilot journey. She logged 193 hours before she passed her check ride, nearly triple the average. And while that sounds like dedication, the distribution matters. Only about 10.5 of those hours were flown solo, meaning most of her time was still done with an instructor supervising decisions.
2 months after getting her license, she sold her training aircraft and bought a Beech Debonair, a complex, high-performance aircraft with retractable landing gear.
This is where the story becomes less about the airplane and more about the mismatch. A Debonair demands pilots who have mastered basics: configuration awareness, aircraft energy management, workload control, communication clarity, and the habit of managing automation without letting automation manage you.
Multiple instructors said the same thing. She struggled with radio communications. She over-relied on automation instead of building stick and rudder muscle memory and situational awareness. One instructor put it bluntly: without an experienced pilot sitting beside her, she would quickly lose situational awareness.
2 weeks before her final flight, a flight school manager conducted a training check. It went badly. When told to go around, apply power, and climb away from the ground, she failed to add power. Instead, she started descending toward mountains. The session had to be stopped.
The manager told her directly. She was behind where she should be. She'd bought more airplane than she was ready for. And she didn't change course. She kept flying.
Then the investigation looked at toxicology. Multiple medications were found, drugs on the FAA Do Not Fly list, prescribed for anxiety, depression, and panic disorders. These can impair concentration, motor skills, and decision-making. And importantly, she had never disclosed them during her medical exams. That's not paperwork trivia. That's about whether you're fit to safely perform the task. But there was one more thing the investigation uncovered that's almost impossible to read without feeling the weight of it. Her baseline proficiency was so poor that they couldn't even clearly determine how much the medications contributed. That's how far behind she already was. On the final flight, she was at cruise altitude with autopilot engaged, but this autopilot required manual trim adjustments. When airspeed changed, it would flash a light telling the pilot to trim up or trim down. Her instructors had already noted that she sometimes trimmed in the wrong direction. The flight data backed it up. Altitude swings, hundreds of feet, getting worse with every correction. She was fighting the autopilot. The autopilot was fighting back. At some point, she disconnected it. By then, so much nose-down trim had been applied that the aircraft pitched forward into an unrecoverable dive, around 10,000 feet per minute. She and her father, riding as passenger, were killed on impact. 2 crashes, 2 aircraft, 2 different people. Same underlying architecture. An error chain made of small choices that each felt survivable, until the chain reached the point where you can't stop it anymore.
When aviation safety professionals talk about an error chain, they mean this: every accident is the last link, the part where everything finally collapses, But the collapse happens because earlier links were already in place.
And the haunting truth in these stories is that every link could have been broken.
Here's how. In the jet crash, the retired captain could have put the qualified person, the one with the ratings and appropriate experience, in the co-pilot seat, not because he was afraid, but because he was matching capability to risk. One decision, 3 people walk away.
He could have rejected the takeoff when engine anomalies appeared during the roll, when the light didn't look right and the engines didn't feel right. One decision. 3 people walk away. He could have obtained instrument clearance on the ground and accepted the delay. In the second crash, she could have stayed in her training aircraft longer, built real proficiency, instead of upgrading to an airplane that demanded skills she hadn't reliably developed. One decision. 2 people walk away. She could have disclosed her medications and accepted that flying might not be compatible with her medical situation. One decision. 2 people walk away.
She could have listened, just once, when instructors told her she wasn't ready. One decision. 2 people walk away.
Now here's the part that matters for a general audience, because you might be thinking, okay, but what kind of person does that?
These aren't stories about bad people. The father in the jet story put his son in the seat because he wanted to share something beautiful. The young woman in the second story wanted her dream so badly she didn't want to give up.
These are human impulses every person recognizes, wanting to share, wanting to prove, wanting to believe that this time will be different.
But the sky doesn't grade on a curve. It doesn't care about intentions. It cares whether the physics work out. And physics are brutally honest. If you stack enough small compromises, one after another, you build a structure that cannot support itself.
Then it collapses. All at once, with no warning and no second chances.
So what could have saved them? Not better technology. The warnings and instruments existed. The signs existed. People existed who could have stopped it. Not more regulations. The rules already said no in the moments that mattered.
The answer is almost painfully simple. Discipline in the small moments. The willingness to say no when everything inside you wants to say yes.
The humility to recognize when you're in over your head, before the emergency forces you to learn whether you can handle it.
And the courage to break the chain, even when breaking it feels inconvenient or disappointing, or like you're admitting you're not as capable as you hoped you were. Because every decision you make either adds a link to that chain or removes one.
You don't always get a second chance to correct a single moment. That's what makes the discipline so important. It has to show up early, before the chain tightens. And on the days people choose wrong, 228 people pay for it. Every year, like clockwork.
So if this leaves you with one takeaway, make it this. When you're tempted to keep going, when the aircraft, the weather, the schedule, or the ego says continue, pause and look for the smallest removable link. That pause might be the difference between a story that ends in silence and a story that ends with everyone walking away.